Well, welcome to the sixth edition of our live YouTube Magpie Circle show. Big game coming up this weekend against Torquay, top of the table, form team of the season by so far. So who better to get on our show tonight? Look ahead to that one, COVID permitting. A man who's had foot in both camps, Kevin Nicholson, great escape artist from the early 2000s against Huddersfield Town with Notts over 100 games for us. And also he's a bit of a ledge down on the Devonian coast. Former player, former manager of Torquay. Kevin, thank you very much for joining us again.
Evening. Thank you for having me again, Paul.
Yeah, no, it's very good. It's very good. I can't keep up looking at you, but wondering what banter you're going to get from Neil Bishop because it's been seesawing a bit from last time, hasn't it?
Yeah, he's a bit bitter because when I first met Bish, he had a lovely full head of hair, and I had my receding hairline coming in, and he used to give me a bit of stick up at Scarborough, and then obviously he's gone to pot, hasn't he? He's got the old Zidane going on, and it's tough. It's tough for Bish, but I'm glad that he went on from Scarborough and had a fantastic career, and he's still knocking about a little bit now, trying to play, isn't he? So.
Yeah, and because he's involved with some of the youngsters at Mansfield, so you never know. He might apply to be a job to work for you one of these days.
I couldn't hire him. He's not reliable enough in any sense of the word. So.
We'll start this show off with a get well soon message to former Notts County manager Steve Cottrell, not a million miles away from you, always a big Bristolian. Shrewsbury issued a statement about Steve Cottrell today. He was hospitalised over the weekend. We believe he's on the mend now from COVID. So on behalf of all Notts County fans, Steve is a pretty rare breed. He's a manager of Notts County that's got a championship on his CV for us. I think he's the only one in this last 2 decades to be able to do it. So all the very best to Steve, and get well soon. Okay, let's look ahead. Torquay, the form team. But it is only a third of the season gone. You're down that neck of the woods. Gary Johnson has clearly got them playing extremely well. Has it surprised the fan base? Did it surprise you from keeping your ear to the ground, Kev?
No, I don't think so. I mean, obviously, at the beginning of any season, every fan base thinks they're going to win the league, and that's the general positive feel that everybody has going through the summer and coming into a fresh season. But I was lucky enough to watch Torquay play in pre-season. There was a behind closed doors friendly at Exeter's training ground, and so I got to see them, in their early stage of gelling with a few new players, and one or two had left, and you could see then it was a very much a Gary Johnson side of the same ilk of when he got promoted with Cheltenham a few years ago. It was a big, physical, strong team with a blend of experience and youth. A little bit of pace down the sides, and a big man up front for people to play into and play off. The back four were generally a no frills, don't mess about, defend and defend properly type. And that was very much what he got promoted with Cheltenham a few years ago. So you could see that they were always going to be a solid, tough to beat, tough to score against team that had threats. And I mean, I think anybody'd be kidding themselves at these levels if you could say you're going to predict that they were going to win the league. But I left there thinking that they had a real good chance of being a top 6 kind of team. And like with most teams in the National League and in League Two, a little bit of confidence, a little bit of momentum can go a long way. And they've rode that wave, and they've done it really well to get where they are now.
Because when he arrived, it was National League South, wasn't it? So he had to get them out of the South before this division, yeah.
That's right. Yeah, he took over from Gary Hours, and he took over when they were struggling in the National League South, and ended up getting promoted first time from there. I think last season would have been a season where they just kind of re-established themselves. If it wasn't for COVID and all the issues that caused, they were doing pretty well, okay. And I think obviously as an experienced manager, he certainly learned the level, learned what was required, or I think in his case, in fairness, refreshed himself, because obviously he's been there and done it at that level. and he went out and he recruited accordingly. And like I say, I saw them in pre-season. I commentated on one of their games down here when they played Crawley in the FA Cup, and they actually ended up getting knocked out 6-5 after extra time. It was a crazy game of football. But for large periods of that game, they were excellent, and they were, twice they were about 3 minutes. There were 2 goals up with about 3 minutes to go, and didn't quite close it out that time. But I think that was very much an outlier. That they are packed with experience that can make sure they see games out, and so I think it will be up to Notts to get them on the back foot and try and get ahead, I would say.
Recruitment's always a huge thing, isn't it? We had Martin Allen on a show, I think it was last week or the week before. Martin was saying Gary's brother is his kind of scout and looks out for the players, and Martin's very good. He knows where everybody is and sees all the games. And he said that Gary's brother is a big factor in getting the right players in.
Yeah, he tends to take him with him, whatever club he's been at. Certainly the last few, I see that he's popped up there as head of recruitment. I think with anything, excuse me, with any job in football, with any team that you're working with, those people that you've got around you, you need to trust them. You need to trust their judgment. You need to trust they're going to go out and you've got that shared vision. And I think his brother obviously knows the kind of player that he likes. He knows the kind of players that are effective at the level that Gary's been at. 'Cause obviously he's such a hugely experienced manager. He's been up and down the football pyramid a couple of times over, I think. So I think his brother's learned the levels, learned what he likes, and he goes out and he delivers in that way. And you look at some of the guys they got in. They've got Danny Wright up front. Both of them would have known him from their Cheltenham days. I played with Danny at Kidderminster in 2015, and if he sees this, apologies, but at that point I thought he was on his way out. I first of all, I thought he was about my age. I was 35 at that point. I thought he's about my age, and it just wasn't happening for him. He looked like a player where he'd had a good run, and this was him on his way out. And it didn't work out for him at Kidderminster, and he went to Solihull, and they go to Cheltenham first. He went to Cheltenham with Gary Johnson, and like you do in football, I looked at it and thought, wow, that's a hell of a move, because he really wasn't doing it. And he absolutely tore it up. And I saw him again. I was chatting to him in pre-season. He's got himself fit. He looks younger than he did 5 years ago. He moves pretty well for a big guy. He chases everything down. He's nasty to play against. He's one of those that will make your life uncomfortable as a defender. And when he gets in front of goal, he's calm. He scores his fair share ahead of goals because he's that type of guy, but he's also good with his feet. And with people like Ben Whitfield that they've got playing for them out wide, he's got a supply line as well. So there's threats all over, but I think their recruitment was good. They did go out there and they got some good players in.
Clearly, Torquay having done so well, how big a game is this on Saturday? Because we are only a third of the season through, but nevertheless, I guess it will attract a reasonable amount of attention, this fixture. Torquay have played 17, Notts have played 14, got to play 44 games this season. How will both managers, both sets of players view this one?
I think it's a bizarre situation, because normally at this point, you're at least half the season over. The football person in me, the manager in me, would tell you the boring answer. It's just the next game, therefore it's the most important. They just need to concentrate, both teams, on how they're best going to win the game that's in front of them. But this season does feel like it's been going on forever. It does feel like it's been a good stretch. And when you think that Notts have only played 14 games, that's a bizarre stat halfway through January. So yes, it's a big game. Yes, they've got to make sure, both teams, that they focus only on that game. Will it be a season definer? Probably not. Not when you've got 30 games left to play, the best part of. And that league itself, Notts have put some good results together. Torquay have been hugely consistent after, I think they lost on the opening day. And then they've just put a run together. And it happens in more than most levels in the National League. If you get on a run, it's amazing how far you can ride that wave and how much that momentum has an effect. So I wouldn't rule out any of the top kind of 6 in that league of winning it. But at the same time, it's advantage Torquay right now. And if they continue to focus on the job in hand in the next game, they've certainly, repeating myself, I know, but with the experience of the manager, with Aaron Downs as the assistant, who's, fairly fresh into this, into coaching, but he's been in and around it himself. He knows what it's like to get promoted out of this league. And people like Dean Moxey, who signed from Exeter in the summer, Danny Wright, who we've mentioned, Whitfield, who's younger but played a lot of games. They've got Asa Hall. I mean, they've got so much experience down the spine. You'd think that they are going to be tough to catch.
Okay. I have a feeling that Saturday will be quite feisty, because I don't know how much you know of the background. But Gary Johnson and Notts County don't necessarily, they're not necessarily a great mix. They're a bit combustible. There have been 1 or 2 rucks down the years when Gary's brought various teams to Meadow Lane. And we had Tommy Johnson, who you would know, on for a 2-parter last week, and there was basically a 22-man brawl plus coaching staff at the end of a Notts County victory at Peterborough United in something like 2010, the Battle of London Road. Mark Draper ended up getting fined, but Tommy fessed up to being one of the main culprits in the scrape, with Mark Robson from the other side on the coaching side, who I guess you would know as well. And I think Gary Johnson got a little bit involved with Tommy as well afterwards, in telling him he should know better. And I think Tommy took a bit of an exception to that. And as you know, Tommy's quite a placid guy. So I have a feeling there might be a little bit of needle in that one. It's been such a stop-start season. Torquay, the form team. Are you surprised Notts have already lost 5 out of 14, or is have we not really got to the business end yet?
No, I don't think you're anywhere near the business end as such. I am a little bit surprised that Notts have lost that many games so far. I know that they go on these good runs and put a few wins together, and then there's a little bit of a blip, because I keep track on the teams that I used to play for, and certainly in and around the level that I'm at in League Two and the National League. I also think it's just, there's so much going on. There's so many exterior factors at the moment. There's so much noise in terms of the media, COVID. Is the season going to finish? Is it going to continue? Is your game at the weekend going to be off because it only takes a couple of guys going down with COVID and it's off? It's easy to be distracted. And so I think for Notts, it's a case of just getting on with it one game at a time. For Torquay, they've managed to do that so far. Can they continue to do that? Of all seasons that there's been, this is probably the one there's most excuse out there for people to take their eye off the ball. Yeah, there's probably the biggest opportunity for most, because everything's wide open and there's so much football left to play that it would only take a bad couple of weeks on Torquay's front and they would be getting caught. And you often find, very, very rare does a team start off absolutely flying and see the season out comfortably without having a blip. So how they react to that blip, if they have it, is going to be huge to them. And I'm sure Notts will hope that blip starts on Saturday. Yeah,
Notts' record against the better teams isn't bad. We had Stockport in a televised game down here before Christmas. And that was probably as complete a performance as Notts have given. And they played very well that night and were good value. There have been other times at home, lost at home to Boreham Wood, which I think was a bit of a surprise. Hartlepool weren't bad when they came down to Notts, and Hartlepool won. So Notts' home form, they've lost 2 of their recent home games. We hear a lot about, this is such a unique season, a lot of noise, and that excuses this, that excuses that, and so on and so on and so on. Broadly speaking, it's the same for everyone. So does that cancel it out, or is it more disadvantageous for certain types of club?
No, I think I would look at it more. The excuses are there if it wants to be taken by anybody, and some will and some won't. I don't think that matters particularly on who you are. I think in my experience of National League football, it's more a case of there is such a variation of big historic clubs like Notts, like Torquay, like Stockport, as you spoke about. There's also clubs out there that are less well known. I don't want to be disrespectful and say smaller, but that, so someone like Boreham Wood. Now, Boreham Wood are a smaller club by comparison, but they're well run. They've got the academy that they have behind the scenes, so their budget that they can spend on the players isn't as terrible as what a club like Boreham Wood would suggest. So they get some good players in.
Yeah. The manager's been there a while. He's done well, hasn't he? He's only a young lad as well.
He has. He's done really well, yeah. And he has got a record of taking in players that are maybe not showing their potential and getting the best out of them. I quite like the style of football that he played. I've not seen them for a couple of seasons now, so I'm assuming it's the same. But they were always full of quick players and playing on break.
Yeah.
But I think it's difficult for some clubs like Notts when they come down and they're used to playing Football League clubs every week. They're used to the kind of kudos that brings. They're used to the pressure and probably the nerves and all the stuff that goes with playing against bigger teams. So you get up for it and you're ready for it, so even subconsciously. Whereas away at Altrincham, with all due respect to Altrincham, probably doesn't float the boat of one or two of the players quite as much as it does when you're playing in League Two and you're potentially playing away at Bolton Wanderers this year. With that in mind, I think, COVID is an exterior factor. This league has got a history of big clubs coming up short against the smaller ones because the pressure's not on those smaller clubs. The fan bases expect big things from all of the former league clubs in the league, and they don't necessarily know how good some of the players are that play for Altrincham and for Dover and for Weymouth and for clubs that they wouldn't have played against before. And it creates this weird kind of clash where strange results come up really quite often because there are some really, really good players in the conference. There are some players that are a lot better paid in the conference at the clubs that they might be at than a lot of bigger clubs would necessarily expect. So there's a certain disparity there where just because you're a small club in the conference doesn't necessarily mean that the wages are smaller than, say, at a Notts County or a Torquay. And it's almost confusing. I mean, fans get really annoyed when a big club loses to a little one,
Yeah.
And I've experienced it firsthand at Torquay. We were on our knees and financially, and I would play a game and we would lose to a Boreham Wood who had bigger resource than us, but nowhere near the bigger name. And you would get absolutely murdered for it as players and as staff. And you get it, you totally understand it. But it's a fascinating league. It's a really strange league like that. And so Notts County have to treat every club as the same thing. It's just a group of 11 players they've got to go out and beat and not look at the badge and not look at the fan base and not look at the history. And that's sometimes quite hard to do. I think some clubs and some players and some managers can get a little bit caught up in it.
Yeah, Maidenhead will be a good example of what you're saying there. They came up to Notts and beat Notts. I think they'd won at Wrexham the week before, and yet it's hard for for followers of league clubs to get the head around. You're losing at home to Maidenhead. I didn't even the cynic was had even though they had a football team. But kind of they've done the business.
Is Alan Devonshire still the manager there?
He's still there.
So you've got a hugely experienced manager who's put some decent teams together over the last decade or two. I mean, of them, you've got Dan Sparks, who I know I had at Torquay. He was a left winger who is quick, direct, got fantastic delivery. You've got Big Blissett up front, who was one of the guys that was involved in my great escape at Torquay, who is a handful for any defence at any level in the lower leagues, whether it's League One, League Two, National League. He's big, he's hard to play against, he's tough. And I watched them play a couple of seasons ago now when they were a different team, but it was the same thing. It was a shock to people just how good they were. But it's the reality of conference football, especially somewhere with their geography, because they can pick those players that have been released by some of the London clubs, for instance, that maybe weren't quite good enough at Premier League and Championship level who want somewhere to play. They can give them a reasonable wage to go down there with a potential pathway back to league football. So there's a lot going for it. And the catchment area allows them to get those players in. And Alan Devonshire's no mug. He knows what he's doing. He's put conference sides together before that have been successful. and it can be a shock to people. And I mean, a lot of clubs are really lucky that there's no fans at the moment, because when you start losing to, Notts County losing at home to Maidenhead, I can imagine the fans would have had something to say on it. So that's one distraction that you've not got to worry about, I suppose, right now. But it also takes away from the game, doesn't it? You want the passion, you want the joy, you want the annoyance, you want all the stuff that goes with having fans in that stadium and backing the team as best they can.
And a random one, I think I'm right in saying we had a young centre half several years ago, played in the Manchester City FA Cup tie. Christian Pearce. Did he go down Torquay? Were you about then?
Yes, I was. Yeah, so he came down to us, obviously young man at the time. He did okay for us. He wasn't flying. He was still kind of learning his trade a little bit. I can't remember where he came from now. I want to say West Brom or someone like that, but it was a higher up club, and he came in and you could see his physical attributes. He was quick, he was strong, he was pretty comfortable on the ball. Wasn't the biggest centre half you've ever come across, but made up for it with those other attributes. And yeah, he came to us and he had a couple of seasons, and unfortunately he came at a bad time, because that was towards the end of my time as a player, and that was when we ended up getting relegated back out of League Two.
The reason I mention him, he's gone to Boreham Wood, Harry, today. Yeah, Boreham Wood have picked him up today. Yeah, he's gone from Solihull Moors to Boreham Wood. So be interested. He wasn't bad at Notts, to be fair. He wasn't bad.
I know he did particularly well at Mansfield as well. I used to see a couple of the games. I think he got Player of the Year there one year, and he kind of reinvigorated his career a little bit there. But I imagine at National League level, he's a very, very good centre half.
Okay, I've got a question in from Neil on the live chat, Neil Holmes. What are your thoughts on the government/National League loan? He refers to it as debacle. I probably wouldn't disagree. And can the season realistically finish?
Well, I'm not 100% up to speed with all the stuff that's been going on with that. I think the government, first of all, I don't envy them.
Yeah.
But yeah, they need to do a better job, I think, of helping out the football clubs, because I know this is a debate. I hesitate because there's so many things you could put your foot in here when answering a question like this.
No. I mean, we did discuss this at length with Martin last week. Second part of the question, can the National League finish this season?
I think it can. But it's a massive, massive ask for so many football clubs at that level, where, any lower league club, I keep saying at that level, and that again is almost disrespectful, because the National League is essentially League 4 or League 3. There are clubs in there that if they got into League 2 would more than hold their own. But it's so difficult to get out of it because of the one club going up automatically and only the one place in the playoffs. So it is, and I've played in it a lot, managed in it. It's a big, big league full of full-time teams that can do good things. The biggest and most obvious problem is without the fans, without the sponsorship, without the commercial, without all of that stuff that goes on, even what the government may or may not help out with is going to be pittance compared to that. So any club that were planning on going for it and maybe overspent, and there's always one or two of those in the league, are going to be struggling unless they've got a wealthy benefactor who's willing to write off X amount of hundreds of thousands, if not more, pounds. So it's a really, really tough one, because I don't think they can afford to scrap it, because that will kill as many teams as continuing. They've got to the point now where I just think they need to find a way through it. And it's so difficult because so many livelihoods are at stake, so much history is at stake. But at the same time, when you weigh it up against what so many other people are going through in the NHS and the key workers and that kind of stuff, it is a horrible, horrible situation. But a football club brings so much to the community. It brings so much to its supporters. It is certainly a distraction to a lot of people now who are locked up and unable to go out and do too much. To be able to watch your team play once or twice a week is a great release and a great something to look forward to so many people. It is not an easy situation for anybody involved. I would like to think that one or two of those guys in the Premier League at some point in the near future might realise how much they could help out and how little in the grand scheme of things it would be to them to help out some of those teams lesser well off, so to put. But even that's going to cause a debate because, I saw some comments about Macclesfield going out of business, owing a couple £100,000 or whatever it was, and one or two people saying, why did no one bail them out? And others arguing, well, why didn't they cut their cloth accordingly? And it's vicious. It's a brutal game. It's dog eat dog in a lot of ways. But if you're in the Premier League and you're getting millions in TV revenue and you've got players on 300 grand a week and you've got all that kind of thing, it's not much of a percentage for those players or those organisations to help out those clubs lower down, who often breed the players that they end up buying, that they get great success from, who they send their players out on loan to get experience so that they are then better off when they go back to them. It's not just a case of us and them. The lower leagues facilitate and help and develop players that go on and then have these big careers that everybody reads about. We had the boy Ollie Watkins at Exeter, and Ollie Watkins was playing on loan at Weston-super-Mare a few years ago. And then he's gone from Weston to Exeter's first team to Brentford's first team to 30 odd million into the Premier League. And now he's doing well at Villa, who are having a great season. So the lower leagues have had a big hand in him getting to where he is. Jamie Vardy was playing at Stocksbridge 10 years ago. And then he's worked his way through Stocksbridge and Halifax and Fleetwood when they were non-league. And now all of a sudden he's 100 goals plus in the Premier League. So it really isn't just a case of us and them. I'd like to think that somewhere along the line there'll be one or two conversations had at the top end as to how they can help out. But it's not their fault they get 300 grand a week, and it's not fair to hold them to ransom or make them feel guilty about it. So I see both sides. I wouldn't like to be on that debating panel.
I think one of the challenges you've got is that you haven't got one league responsible for all these divisions. You've got the Premier League, then you've got the Football League, then you've got the National League. And so there is inevitably, as well as I do, Kev, people will always look after their own best interests first. Now, one thing that did surprise me, and I've been trying to get to the bottom of this for a while, and we had Simon Stone on from the BBC, who's kind of like the number one football man. He knows everybody and all the rest of it. And he was saying, because I was saying, how many games have to be played in the National League, before it kicks in, points per game and all the rest of it? He said they never agreed, nor did the EFL apparently, which I find staggering. I find absolutely staggering, because you can see where I'm going with this. Yeah. If you get half the season through, if you get 2/3 of the season through, right? And I know the bottom 8 teams in the National League are all going to say declare it null and void. Yeah. The top, anyone that's got a chance of the playoffs and above are going to be saying carry on. But I don't, for the life of me, understand why the National League executive or its member clubs, and likewise the Football League, didn't say, right, if we don't play 70% of the games, it's null and void. And then no one can complain. Slough, who are third bottom of National League South or something, last week put a letter in to the National League Board saying that the season should be null and void. Unfair to put our players through this, blah, 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 blah. You and I both know if they were third top, they wouldn't be putting a letter in saying scrap the National League. But I think that's a problem come March, April time.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever claimed that football is the best run industry in the world. I think, like you say, there is a lot of looking out for your own, which you would. There's also a great deal of decisions are made in hindsight, and to go into the season not having decided that, it does seem crazy right now. I'm sure they had a rationale at the time. I'd love to hear it.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. And why not communicate it as well? Because it's been very hard to find out.
Yeah, and this is the thing. It's so difficult because you don't really know the conversations that have been going on unless you're in those boardrooms. You're never really going to know, because a lot of people start covering their own back when it comes to it. So they're never going to put out what was really said or what was really what, or they'll blame someone else. Most of the people making those decisions probably aren't directly hurt by Macclesfield going out of business or the the season getting closed down, halfway through and being null and void or not. Can you blame Slough for doing that? They're on a hide into nothing. I suppose at their level, no fans coming in, third bottom, getting relegated while losing money. I mean, that kind of thing would be horrible for any club. And even when you say like the teams in and around the playoffs, it is going to be expensive for any club to get to the playoffs and play it without fans, because it's another set of games that you've got to play. Normally, the playoffs will make great deal of revenue for any club that gets there in shirt sales, in the bumper crowd that you get on the home leg, on the potential of Wembley. You would make a huge amount of money from that. But having to extend your season by 2 or 3 weeks without the revenue, it's an expensive gamble, because, as we all know, one bad game in the playoffs and you're knocked out, and that was that. So it's a horrible, horrible situation for everyone involved. I just hope that those guys that really can make the decisions, and those guys with the power and the money, look at what's best and do something that helps out the masses. There's always going to be somebody that suffers. There's always going to be somebody that's disappointed, but do what's best for the many, I would say, in this situation.
On the subject of COVID, we should have been at Yeovil last night, and I think you were trying to get along yourself, but Yeovil have been hit by a second bout of COVID now, so they were off at the weekend. They're off tomorrow. I don't want to put you on the spot, but do you understand what the actual rules are surrounding COVID for getting a postponement? Because Notts had 2 games postponed against Kings Lynn because a member of the Kings Lynn coaching staff had it. Notts earlier in the season against Maidenhead had 2 or 3 players test positive, but elected to play the game. So it does all seem rather bizarre at the minute as to what is and isn't the rule. I mean, have your club Exeter suffered with COVID at all this season, or?
We've had a couple of positive cases, but it's never affected the games. And to answer your question, I haven't got a clue.
No, I don't think many people have.
It just seems like that, again, there must be some due process. There must be some kind of cut-off or reasoning or rationale as to why. I don't know it. And when I look at it from my position, and I look at the games that do get called off and the games that don't, and those that get called off 20 minutes before they're going to kick off, and those that get organised 48 hours before, and all the stuff that's in between, have not got a clue. It does. The contradictions and the issues, it is confusing, and I can imagine infuriating for a lot of people watching the game. I just try not to get too caught up or too wound up with it.
Yeah, because I think that we all know these are unprecedented times. We all know these are hugely challenging ventures into the unknown. But given my background in comms and PR and all the rest of it, I can't help but think clubs can be more transparent and educate fans, because we all make wild stabs in the dark. And for all I know, the Torquay chief exec's watching this and the Notts chief exec's watching. I said, hey, he don't know what he's talking about. Well, I like to think I'm a bit more educated than most, not a lot, but a little bit more. And if I ain't got a clue, 95% of our respective fan bases won't have a clue. And it does appear to be, I don't want to be cynical here, but sometimes I think situations can be managed a little bit, you know what I mean, to get to an outcome that you want.
Well, I would hate to turn your show into a political show, but it's from the top down, isn't it? And so, I don't envy the guys having to make these decisions. It must be awful, because they're damned if they do, they're damned if they don't. But with that in mind, like you say, I would like to think that a clear message, and even the odd, to be honest, we don't know right now, and we're having to do the best with the knowledge that we've got, would put my mind to rest that these guys are more honest and clear thinking than saying one thing and backtracking the next day and then completely U-turning the day after that. It's terrifying and misleading, and like you say, it just then leads to rumor, and those rumors can go quick. I mean, in the football sense, we spoke about it on our podcast about fans forums and all the rest of it, I mean, things can go through those places like wildfire. Those rumours then become facts for a lot of people. Those facts can actually be damaging to a lot of people that are out there and around it. And like you say, a little bit of clarity, a little bit more honesty, and a little bit probably trusting people to be able to take news that isn't definitive might actually help them feel a little bit more at rest, and at least a bit more empathetic and sympathetic and understanding that sometimes you just don't know.
Looking at the National League, and we spoke about different approaches. Martin Allen, when we had him on, spoke about he felt you needed almost to target the best players, National League North, National League South, and get a group of very, very hungry players. And if you can, get the one goal scorer. So kind of his model at Barnet was getting John Akinde and surrounding them with younger, hungrier players. Is there a blueprint, or is it really down to individual manager and his philosophy and kind of imposing that?
Yeah, I don't like that phrase, young and hungry, because I was hungry to play when I was 35 because I wanted to show that I still had it and that I was still good enough, and I was desperate to be good at that. And so that's not to say that every 35-year-old's like that. Some of them just want the next paycheck and another season in football because they don't know what else they're going to do. The same as you might have a 19-year-old who's flying at the level that he's at, but isn't overly motivated, and he steps up a league and realizes that it's a step too far. I think your recruitment, as you talked about earlier with Gary Johnson's brother, is massive. Hungry players, definitely, but it's not as easy just to call them young and hungry, because there's what your viewers, I'm sure, will be really well aware of Sean Harrod, who came through Notts County at a similar time that I did. I took Sean Harrod to Torquay in that Great Escape season, and he was 33 and he was coming to the end of his career, and he knew it and I knew it, but he could not have been hungrier to have one last go, to go out with a bang, to work himself into the floor, to run around and put pressure on people that most 19-year-olds wouldn't know how to do or be even physically capable of doing. He just put himself about everywhere. So I think to just generalize young and hungry would be a mistake. However, recruitment isn't a perfect science. And so your philosophy as a manager on what you want to get in, how you want to vet them, how you want to find out if they are. I mean, I learned the hard way. Several times I've kind of reached out to people to ask about people's character. What's this player like? And they'll go, oh, he's a great lad. And down the line, you realise that they were basing that on what he was like after a few beers on a night out, not what he was like in the dressing room or what he was like in terms of his work ethic or his dedication or his passion or commitment. So it's very much down to individuals. You need to do your homework when you're getting those players in. Make sure you get those players that fit your system, fit your style, fit your ethos, your moral code, whatever it is that you value most. And then try and gel them in a way that allows them to consistently go out there and pull off what you want. And what you want needs to be shared with them. Generally speaking, nowadays, it needs to be a group of players that actually are bought into the process or understanding of what we're trying to do, whether it's the style of play or the goal of getting promoted or the goal of staying up or whatever it might be. There's a lot of work that goes into it. And, one of my first bits of advice given to me when speaking about jobs that you could and couldn't accept was that you need one of two things. You either need to be given time or money. If you get given both, you've got no excuse. If you get given money, you might not have the time to spend it wisely enough to be able to get the results you want, because there's no guarantee that's going to work. If you get given time, you've probably got the best shot, because even on a low budget over time, you can just about put together something that is effective and able to get results and able to play well. The problem is, if you haven't got money, is that the moment you start doing well, people with money come in and start taking your players because they're doing well and they know they're going to pay them more than you can. So it's there's no definite science. There's nothing to it. I'm sure there's people listening that think, well, that was bull. What's he talking about? I'm sure there's people in there that saw my teams in the Great Escape and thinking, well, he maybe has an idea on what he's doing. And there'll be those in between that have never heard of me and never want to. So it's no science, but I think it's fascinating. It's why I love the game, and I'm sure why a lot of the fans and coaches and other managers do.
If we look at trying to complete this season, we did a straw poll of Notts fans, and I think it was something like there were three options: carry on as normal, take a month's break, or null and void. And no real surprises. I think there's about 57% said just carry on and try and get through it. 22% said null and void, and 22% said take a month's break. See how the vaccine kicks in and all the rest of it. I don't think there's a week goes by at the minute where the National League can get half its fixtures out. Not, a lot of games being postponed. What would your view be on those three choices?
I'd be very much just get it done, get it played out. If that means you extend the season by a few weeks, then extend it by a few weeks. That even with the amount of games left to play, it's essentially Saturday, Tuesday all the way through until the season finishes. Historically, the league has been very, very committed that it will finish. The league will finish on the date that is set. I think this year they've got to be a little bit more understanding. I remember going to Scarborough the year they'd done well in the FA Cup, and we had to play like 13 games in 5 weeks or something crazy. We were playing like Saturday, Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday. Now that then becomes a little bit dangerous, because it's all right, Premier League managers moaning about playing 3 games a week, but they've got 25-man squad and they're all internationals. We had like a 16-man squad, and pretty much all of us were playing every minute of every game. So that becomes that's probably the case for most National League teams now. They're not going to be blessed with massive squads. So I would say get it done safely as best you can, safely for the players from a physical standpoint, but safely from COVID as best you can. And then if that means extending the season a little bit, well, fine. I think that every player out there would accept a slightly shorter summer to get ready and go again for next season, when we know things will, with the vaccine out there and everything else, next season will be closer to normal. I still imagine there'll be a few issues here and there, but closer to the normal that we all know. But get through this season, see it out, make it as fair as it can possibly be. Try and look after those clubs that are really absolutely on their knees, and go from there. Because if you cancel it, that means you're going to have to release all your players, because you're not going to pay them for the next 6 months while they're not doing anything.
Yeah.
It means that livelihood, clubs, revenue, all of it's still going to be the same issue. So you may as well get some football out of it and some results and excitement for the fans and all the rest of it, than sit doing nothing, depressed, while your club rots and goes under and you've got no players.
Slightly unusual case, but give us a player's perspective. At Notts, Wes Thomas, striker, he's been very concerned about catching COVID, to the point where he has declined to train with the rest of the squad. So he now trains on his own, and the rest of the squad train as a group. I think the basic upshot of that is that he isn't considered to be played at the minute, because if he's not taking part in a group training session, how can you? And I assume there are contractual issues here about turning up, not turning up, and all the rest of it. What's the player's viewpoint amidst all of this? I mean, from your experience at Exeter, the young lads, the pros, everyone happy to come in, or are there genuine concerns that they're being forced down a path that they're not comfortable with?
No, I mean, generally speaking down here, I know it's getting a little bit worse at the moment, but we've been fortunate in that the COVID rates haven't been sky high in the southwest. It's been the lowest. If you look at Mr. Whitty's graphs that he likes to put up, it's been the lowest, generally speaking, throughout the pandemic. It is a tough one, because I would say in that case, if somebody feels that strongly, then their wishes should be respected. However, if you look at, say, the NFL, they gave their players the option to opt out, and if they did, they opted out of their wage, I believe it was, for the year. And therefore now there's not many National League players that can opt out of a year's money. However, it is, for some people, it's a bigger worry than others. And who are we to say that is wrong? I mean, there's plenty of people out there arguing that football shouldn't be played at all. So Yeah, like with most things at the moment, there's very little black and white. There's very little absolutely nailed on definite. You could talk about these celebration discussions that people are having and all the rest of it. Generally speaking, football is probably the safest industry out there because the players are tested so often, and I don't know if that's the case in the National League.
Yeah.
And if it's not, then his case is probably strengthened. However, your own bubble, they're working through a lockdown. So the only place they're going to get it likely is if they pick it up at shopping, or they're very unfortunate. It is, I'd respect his wishes, but it must hurt the football club because I doubt there's a way of not paying him, and they definitely can't play him. So he then becomes an expensive issue. And yeah, I mean, I had about three voices. When you asked the question, I had about three voices go off in my head. And one of them was like, oh, for God's sake, just play. And the other one was like, oh, come on, respect his wishes. He's got to be, you've got to look after people, safety first and so on, which is absolutely right. And then you kind of weigh the two up in the middle that are like, well, each their own. I get it. If it was me, I'd be playing until such time as I couldn't. And I would expect that most of my teammates would do the same. But I wouldn't talk ill of him based on his decision.
Yeah, the celebrations one which you just mentioned is an interesting one, and Simon Stone was kind of like marking our collective cards last week on that because it kind of sounds not that important, but in the background, it's been a very, very important discussion that's been ongoing between government and the football authorities, particularly Premier League, and the government have been very, very strong with the Premier League because of kind of the transparency of the celebration in front of millions of people when police are under orders to fine two people hanging around together outside a bubble having a coffee on a park bench in Richmond. Yeah. And clearly, if you are not of a football persuasion, you'll be saying, how can them footballers, and so on and so on and so on. So the Premier League have been really, really strict and have been the government have been really strict, laying the law down to the point say, you can't allow this to carry on. You can't allow this to carry on. And I believe Big Sam, West Brom, arch enemy, Wolverhampton Wanderers, big hug at the end, has not gone down very well at all within government circles. Although you could argue that Leicester have been very clever when Brendan Rodgers apparently spoke with the players and said, can you not come up with a clever, social distancing celebration, which of course Maddison did. And so things that to me and you probably, so what is a celebration to the government? And of course, they can stop Premier League football if they want. They could stop it tomorrow. So I think there's a lot of things going off behind the scenes, and just something that we might consider fairly small, like celebrating, actually to the government is a really big thing because it's another stick to beat the government with, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, again, can see both sides. People out there that haven't hugged their parents or their grandparents or their kids for months. A lot of fear, a lot of uncertainty, a lot of depression. I get all that. They've chose to let football continue because of the upshot, the fact that they've got stuff to watch, the fact that there's entertainment, the fact that so many people out there love the game and get to see it and get to experience it as best they can. Footballers are tested so often that the risk is as minimal as what it can be. So, they train every day together, albeit like the protocols now are very much, you're kind of in and out. You're not necessarily in the changing rooms and things like that. All that kind of stuff. When it first happened, it was told to us that celebrations and set plays are the two main areas of concern, because obviously they're the two times where you get really close to people and you've got hands on and you're touching and you're in close proximity. Most of the game is played at a certain distance from the majority, and even when you're one-on-one defending, you're not getting him breathing all over you unless you're a really good defender. I wouldn't have had any worries about it. Let's put it that way. So yeah, I think personally, if you're going to let football carry on, then let it carry on. I would say that they're being tested. The decision has been made to let it continue. let it continue. If the club, like Brendan Rodgers, chooses to use clever, and get them to socially distant, then great. Let's do something socially distant. Let's look after both sides of it. Have the celebrations, but don't have the hugs. I get that, but let the club and the players decide that, because they've chosen to let their game continue. So let it continue as best they can. If you sat me in front of somebody who passionately believed the other way, I would probably fold on that, if I'm being honest, because safety first, total understanding of how much pain and suffering people are going through right now, how much, I'm fortunate that I'm down here. My only bubble is my family. So I get to hug my kids and see my wife and all that kind of stuff. My family are all up north in Derby and Sheffield. So it's not an option to go up there and spend time with them. And we've come at peace with that. We understand that a few months of sacrifice of not doing it is worth the long term, that they're going to be safe and we'll get to go and do that again in the future. But if you're going to let football continue, let it continue as best you can in its normal form, because that's what excites the fans. That's what, feeds that passion. And I'm very wary that as we're talking, so many of your questions I can see both sides to, and I've got I wasn't, for anybody listening, I wasn't tipped off on any of these questions. So
No.
I can see both sides to all of it. I can genuinely feel both sides to it, and it'd be really, really difficult to commit to one or the other. But in that case, for me, if you were going to pin me down, let them celebrate, because they get tested twice a week and they should be okay. They shouldn't be probably not help themselves by some of the people that have broke curfew and gone out and done daft things, because that then fuels that anger from some. But let them celebrate, let them have some fun, let the fans celebrate at home with them in that sense, and get this season done as best we can.
Just give us, just before we wrap up, give us an insight with you being at Exeter, the COVID era as opposed to before. Is interaction kept to a minimum? I think you were saying you've been actually trying to get in the Notts game tomorrow if it took place at Yeovil, because you were due to have an under-18s or a youngsters game.
The first game that was called off. Our under-18s were going to be playing at Yeovil on the morning, so I would have been there, and so it'd have been a great game for me to watch with Notts County coming down like that. The general thing is, if you think about beforehand, the same as everybody, you'd come into training, there'd be lots of slapping hands, there'd be lots of pats on the back, everybody would be in the room together, in the changing rooms. You'd go out down to the pitch, you wouldn't think twice about, going into the toilet block together and using the facilities. You wouldn't feel twice about putting your boots on while stood next to each other. You'd get showered after the game and everybody'd be in there sorting the kit out on the way to go. You'd probably eat in the little area that we've got for food after, and have a bit of fun and a bit of banter after that. As staff, we would get together every morning and have our staff meetings all in the same room. The usual kind of fun and games that you would have in any workplace. Whereas now, you work from home as best you can work from home. If you do go in, then you've got a mask on at all times, and it's we've had risk assessments done in each room, so you know how many people can go in each room with masks on and the windows open before it becomes an issue. You don't use the changing rooms, so the players turn up. This is the under-18s I'm talking about now. The players turn up half an hour before training in their kit with their boots. They go out on the pitch. When they're not playing, they stay socially distant. When they are playing, they play as best they can. When they finish, they get the boots off, they put the trainers on, they get in the car and they go home. They don't eat together, they don't get changed together, they don't do jobs anymore, they don't tidy the place. The staff, like I say, are pretty much at home the whole time, unless we have a session, in which case we come in an hour before the session, set the session up. We would have a pre-session meeting via Zoom where we'd decide what we were going to do, why we were going to do it, and who was going to do what. Then we'd turn up an hour before, set up, wait for the players, do the session. We have to pick the gear up. Normally you'd get the players to run around and pick everything up for you as part of their penance. But we have to pick all the gear up. We have to put the goals back. We have to, wash the kit down and stuff when it's done. And then we go home and you work from home as best you can there. So that brings with it all kinds of issues in that it's so different for so many. Mental health is a big thing at the moment because there's a lot of people that are on their own. And again, it's all right for me working from home where I finish and then I have to go and deal with homeschooling and make sure my wife hasn't been drinking gin at 11 o'clock in the morning, going through that homeschooling thing. Some are in like a rented accommodation where they rent a room. So you imagine being stuck in your bedroom for every minute of every day while you're doing your work and nowhere that you can really go and meet up. It's probably just a microcosm of what's going on nationally and worldwide. It's just so different because football was and is a very hands-on. There's lots of back patting, there's lots of hugs, there's lots of handshakes, there's lots of rubbing people's heads, well done son, and all that kind of stuff. You would not have thought twice about it, and yet now you go shopping with your mask on and you try and steer clear of anybody else in Sainsbury's. It's bizarre, but as is the world we are currently in, and hopefully we'll get back to some kind of normal sooner rather than later.
That's quite interesting, that, because I was genuinely interested to understand exactly how the changes manifest itself. Does that lead to less intensive training or not?
Not really, no, because I think it's a release for the lads to be able to come and do it. There's not, it's not like we can go and do, usual footballer things after training. You can't go and have a game of golf or down into town for a coffee with your mates or anything else that goes off. It's their time out of the house. It's their release. It's their passion. It's their opportunity for these younger boys to try and become professionals and live their dream. It's just a lot more protocols in place to be able to do it. You have to have your temperature checked every morning when you come in. You have to fill in questionnaires and stuff before you come into work, and if you don't, you can't train. You've got to make sure that everything's done that way. Never once have I ever gone onto a football pitch before and done hand sanitizer before I go onto the pitch, whereas now that's just a given. It is bizarre, and you strangely get used to it really quick. I'm going to find it really weird when I see an old friend from up north and you go in for the manly hug and the pat on the back and how are you, mate, and all that kind of thing, because it's gone. It's not there anymore. All these kind of elbow touches and fist pumps and all that now. That's the new norm.
Kevin, thank you ever so much for joining us. But we're not going to let you get away scot-free. So the big one Saturday, and I'm not going to say use your money on, because then you will quite rightly say to me, I'm not allowed to place bets on in football because you're in the football. Yeah. So what would what's your thoughts on Saturday? Where you're leaning towards?
I am going to go for a 2-2 draw.
I knew you'd go for a draw. I knew you'd go for a draw.
I think that I would be amazed if there were no goals. So I think there's definite goals out there. Torquay away from home, they score goals, but they do concede at the moment. Like I say, that 6-5 I watched was absolutely mental.
Very bizarre turnaround, and it does actually often happen, doesn't it? With the two games that Torquay played against Yeovil, winning something, was it like 1-6 and then lost?
6-2 and then 6-1 and then 2-1 loss.
Yeah.
And I'm also going a bit historically there. That the only time I got back to Meadow Lane to play after I'd left as a player was for Torquay, and we drew 2-2 in the Kasper Schmeichel era. I think he was playing.
That was Munto era. I think that was the game. I think Ian McParland got the sack after that. I think he got the sack. It was a televised game on a Sunday, wasn't it?
Notts were 2 up and we came back to drew 2-2, if I remember rightly.
That's it. Colin Lee was around. I was with him in the boardroom.
Yeah. So that was that's where I'm going with the 2-2. History often repeats itself, doesn't it?
Kev, thank you very much indeed. And all the very best at Exeter, wherever you're off to next. And I look forward to catching up again in the near future.